The New York Times has decided to do something this weekend that has become very unfashionable of late. Actually endorse a presidential candidate. So they put this up. Donald Trump says he will prosecute his enemies, order mass deportations, use soldiers against citizens, abandon allies, play politics with disasters. Believe him. And you don't even have to read the small text because it takes up the whole page. And the reason, of course, that they're doing this is recently, several notable newspapers that have for decades been doing endorsements of candidates decided they're not going to. The LA Times was the first. The billionaire owner of it didn't want to get involved or whatever. Previously had been considered for a job in the Trump administration. We'll see if he gets it this time. The Washington Post, maybe most notably, decided not to do an endorsement, and they've lost like a third of their editorial team now, including their editor-in-chief as a result of that. Oh, they also lost 200,000 subscribers. But don't worry, newspapers just make too much money these days. They'll be fine. And the USA Today also revealed over the last day that they will not be doing an endorsement. Now, look, I think if you're a newspaper and you never wanted to do an endorsement, that's fine. Endorsements are slightly strange, I think, when you get right down to it. But that said, if you've been doing it for cycles and cycles, and only now you decide not to, that seems a little bit strange. As Mac and Sitch points out, democracy dies in darkness. What about in silence? What does that do to it? So anyway, and in particular, Washington Post is getting a lot of criticism because it was revealed that Jeff Bezos apparently had a bit, like the execs at one of his companies, Blue Origin, had a big meeting with Trump like the same day that it was decided. We'll get to all of that. So there's a lot of fears about potential government contracts that are sort of on the line. And maybe Bezos doesn't want to lose access to that if he endorses Harris, or the Washington Post does, and then Trump wins. It's also, Trump has been demonizing the media, calling them the enemy within. Maybe they're worried that their newspapers will be shut down if they endorse the wrong person. I don't know, but I don't like much about this. I'm curious, you having worked for some big companies in media, what you make of this whole battle about whether to endorse or not, David.
I mean, maybe I'm a little bit too cynical here in all this, but to me, this looks like some opportunism by the New York Times in terms of its business advantage over the Washington Post, because the New York Times, for the better part of the last year, has been sane washing Donald Trump and has been criticized mercilessly and deservedly so for the sane washing that they engaged in. The Washington Post, by contrast, has been a bit more aggressive and tougher with Donald Trump. So if you just look at the reporting, the straight news reporting over the last year, I would take the Washington Post over the New York Times. But all of a sudden, because there's this weird thing again about endorsing candidates, and yes, it can be very helpful in terms of understanding local races and who these candidates are and who should I pick for House and governor, whatever it is. The presidential candidate is a sort of a different matter in some ways, and yet we're paying so much attention. And look, I think the Washington Post made a mistake by not endorsing Kamala Harris, and they should be criticized. But in some ways, the New York Times is engaging in some opportunism here to try to clean up their mess from the past year. The Washington Post has this awful mess from the last week. At a certain point, we're going to need more of the straight news reporting of the Washington Post to seep into the New York Times.
A storm is tearing up the digital media industry. Only our audience can save us in these difficult times. Help us reach our goal of 100,000 new members at tyt.com/team.
Yeah, that's great context, and I'm glad that you added that. I guess my fear might be if the Washington Post had an endorsement ready to go, and then Bezos kills it. First of all, I hate that single billionaires have to own all of this stuff. I don't like that at all. And if you believe, as some people believe, that it has to do with business interests, that maybe he's worried about losing access to these government contracts or whatever. The question is, so is that it? You delivered for Trump by not endorsing Harris to get the business contracts, or maybe going forward, the Washington Post's critical coverage gone. Because maybe if they criticize him, maybe you lose those business contracts. Maybe Amazon is hit by something. Why would we expect that the Washington Post would do any critical coverage, despite the previous branding about democracy dies in darkness, if it appears that the billionaire is trying to cozy up to Donald Trump? My fear is, like, I know a lot of people are focusing on this as this is a dereliction of your duty. I hate that you did this. I feel some of that. I'm much more worried about what this signals about the possible surrender going forward of you being a critical piece of the media. What do you think about that?
Right, and within newspapers like the Washington Post, there's supposed to be this huge wall between the editorial page and section and between the straight news reporting. But even people on the other side of the wall can see and hear what's going on the editorial side and the pressure that's being put on editorial writers, and that's inevitably going to, I think, influence the straight news coverage. So that is a legitimate concern moving forward. I think the other part about this, though, is that the Washington Post has been endorsing. Bezos has owned the Washington Post for what, 11 years, 12 years? Why didn't he 11 years ago, when he became owner, say, hey, we're going to change some things? And one of the things we're going to change is we're going to get out of the business of endorsing at the presidential level. Maybe we'll still do it at local levels to help educate and inform our readership, but we're just going to get out. To do it now, to make this decision, as you point out, a week and a half before the election, and to announce it on the very day that one of your vice presidents or whatever is meeting with Donald Trump. I mean, that just smells to high heaven. Even if there's not a connection, as Jeff Bezos suggests, it certainly looks like a connection, and that's the worst part about it.
Yeah, you're 100% right. The timing, I don't think it could look any worse. Like, if you'd done it a year ago, 2 years ago, I would have been like, oh, that sucks. But this just looks terrible. And it's not because I know some people are like, they're worried about the effect on the election. I have no idea if this has any effect on the election. I don't know that. I don't know, but the timing just looks terrible. And I don't like this much power being exercised over the media by like the financial concerns of one single billionaire. That just reeks to me. Thanks for watching our video. Did you know that you can support our show by becoming a subscriber? Just click the subscribe button and also ring the bell so that you get notifications when we're live or when we post new content.